My name is Michael O'Donohue, and my case study was The Ambient House by Vive Studio. Um, so as far as my initial question, I uh, sort of posed the question, what are the effects of environment on architecture and design? And I sort of tried to include engineering within that, due to my dual major in architecture and architectural engineering. So moving into some of the more pertinent information on the poster. Um, Looking into the environment, I focused on six different aspects of said environment, which are sunlight, wind, water, terrain, the available renewable resources, and the culture within the area. Um, the reason I focused on these six was simply because I feel that they are the most important and have the largest impact on design, or at least should. Um, so I tried to look to the engineering side of things in many cases and see the interaction between the architecture and engineering within the design. The reason I focused on the environment was just because of the huge impact it does have on design. In my opinion, the environment should be one of the greatest drivers behind design, simply because that's where the building is, that's what affects the building most regularly, other than the actual inhabitants within the space. So, with the sunlight, obviously you've got this constant source of energy. You also have it changing throughout the day, throughout the year. So you have to take that into account when designing. You don't want so much heat gain that it's going to sweat people out. You also don't want so much shading that you're not getting enough sunlight in. So you have to take the sun angles and everything into account, the altitude, latitude, and such. You also have to take into account wind, especially structurally. Wind can become a huge problem depending on the size of the space. In my case, it wasn't a huge deal because makerspace wasn't that tall. But obviously, the taller the building, the more wind load you're going to get, the harder it is to deal with. Although wind can also be a great source of energy. Um, a lot of buildings, especially uh, in the west, are using wind a lot. So it's a great resource, as well as water. And obviously, in our area, water's a huge deal. We have the greatest source of fresh water in the world, and being able to utilize that in design is very important. You can use that in a myriad of ways, just from design aspect, reflected pools, being able to bounce the light into the building, also using it as a heat sink for energy. Great way to reduce costs on your mechanical system. As far as terrain, same deal. This can have a huge impact on design as far as how many trees are in the area, what kind of foliage, what kind of plants, what kind of topography your building sitting on, whether it's a cliff, whether it's a small hill, big hill, flat land. These all should be taken into account within the actual design. The renewable resources, I mean, sunlight, wind, water covered great deal of them, but there are other ones out there, and different areas are more suited to them, obviously. Um, as far as culture, that's also very specific to each area, as well as different countries, um, different continents, even. So culture can become a huge issue in design, especially if it's deeply ingrained and still very celebrated within the area. Looking to my second poster and some of the different focus on this, I sort of focused more in on the engineering affecting the architecture, um, and in doing so, um, I tried to focus a little bit more on the structure, just because that was, especially in my case study in the ambient house, structure was a big factor within that project, and so being able to use that for my own project was important. Um, so the reason that I focused on the engineering and structure is simply because engineering and architecture are integral to each other. A building doesn't stand without structure. You can't really be in a building without a good mechanical system, electrical system. You can't really see without, obviously, lights and electricity and such. Um, so these two are integral, even though many don't see it that way. So I researched some of the different ways that the structure can affect the architecture, whether the structure is the land itself, um, like in the northern Mexico area here. We've got buildings actually built into the cliff. We've also got, obviously, Frank Lloyd Wright buildings on waterfalls, and cantilevering out. So the structure is very integral to that building. Obviously, the soil and such are very important to how the building sits and what kind of structure is used, what kind of footings are used, if retaining walls are needed. And obviously, this can have a huge effect if any of these fail. There can be landslides and such, which is obviously very dangerous and can result in loss of life. Wind, again, as stated before, can have huge impacts on structure, as well as the materials available in the area and the culture, um, uh, as well as some of the different uh, effects with weather effects within the area. Obviously, flooding is a huge issue in many areas of the world. We get tons of snow here, so that has to be taken into account in the structure, and ice as well, rain. All of these things need to be taken into account, and it greatly affects the structure as well as the architecture um, when these things are taken into account in the design phase. Moving on to the third poster, I tried to focus not only on the engineering sides of things, but I also tried to delve a little bit more into the way the surrounding area could affect the design of the building, like the site topography, as well as the culture of the area or the urban fabric, as well. So the reason that I focused on these is simply because of the implications it can have on the design, focusing on these things as opposed to simply um, arbitrarily selecting materials as well as the layout of the building. These things need to be taken into account for the building to really be considered a good design. Obviously, being in Detroit, we have a rich history in uh, um, industrial design as well as just factory design in general. Albert Kahn obviously had a huge part in Henry Ford's uh, Model T assembly line, and Detroit is just known for, as well as Michigan in general, as a maker state and maker city. And so my project as a makerspace was I tried to take as much from the Detroit area as possible. So the brick in Detroit, even if it's not reclaimed brick, we sit on a huge brick deposit in Michigan. So brick is integral to Detroit buildings and Michigan buildings, as well as just the fact that we have the largest body of fresh water in the world, is integral to the design, as well as having a myriad of different trees that can be used for structure is a huge deal for the building as well as the architecture and engineering in itself. So to conclude, the ways that engineering and the surrounding area can affect architecture, as well as design, can have huge impacts in the end of things, and should always be taken into account from the very beginning, or it can have disastrous consequences, or even if it doesn't, the design ends up never being as well as it could have been.